Do you think just 10 minutes could bring down a banking empire that has stood for 150 years? On a sunny Saturday morning, amidst the upscale streets of New York City's financial district, a black woman wearing a simple polo shirt and faded jeans walked into the headquarters of Premier National Bank. Naomi Ellington, a name whispered across both Wall Street and Washington in closed-door meetings, now looked no different than a housewife on her way to the grocery store. No one in the towering 50-story marble building recognized her. No one suspected that in just 10 minutes, this woman would bring down a 150-year-old banking empire with a series of cold, precise, and irreversible decisions. Naomi stepped through the automatic doors that reflected the crystal light spilling from the soaring ceiling above. The air carried the scent of Italian leather and high-end perfume. Armani-clad clients whispered about multi-million-dollar investments. A diamond-laden lady scanned bond yield charts, and an older man with silver hair signed documents with a Mont Blanc pen worth more than a year's rent. Amid all this, Naomi stood out in the one way people didn't want to notice. No jewelry, no recognizable brands, just her natural curls tied neatly and a worn-out canvas bag slung over her shoulder, one she had used for nearly a decade. And perhaps that was why Miles Everett, the young receptionist often praised as a shining example of the new generation in banking, didn't need more than 3 seconds to pass judgment. She didn't belong here. What he didn't know was that the woman he had just dismissed as out of place indirectly controlled nearly half of the bank's corporate accounts. He couldn't have imagined that she wasn't just an important client, but someone capable of wiping this institution off America's financial map with a single phone call. But that morning, Miles only saw a black woman in old sneakers, and with his eyes alone, he made a decision. This was someone who should be redirected to the ground floor, where the ordinary customers go. Naomi wasn't surprised. She had endured many looks like that. Inside boardrooms, at global conferences, even at her husband's funeral, where a banking executive once told her she should feel honored to be invited. But this time, Naomi wasn't here hoping to be recognized. She was here to measure reactions, to see if the bank she had quietly helped build was still worthy of existence. And the moment Miles glanced at his colleague and raised an eyebrow with subtle suggestion, Naomi had her answer. The story didn't begin with blatant insult. It began with a fake smile, averted eyes, a deliberate delay. But for Naomi Ellington, a woman who had spent 2 decades studying the smallest shifts in banking systems, those details were enough to write an indictment. And at that moment, as Miles hesitated before typing on his keyboard, Naomi knew the game had begun. Only this time, she was the one writing the rules. Miles Everett tilted his head slightly, his gaze drifting over Naomi's natural curls, pausing for a moment on her worn shoes and unbranded canvas bag. In his mind, a conclusion had already been drawn. Then, as if everything had become perfectly clear, he turned to Tessa Bloom, the colleague behind the reception desk, and exchanged a brief glance with her, the kind shared by people accustomed to judging someone's worth in the first 3 seconds. There were no questions about her name, no offer to check the appointment schedule, only a polite, overly theatrical suggestion. "This floor is reserved for private clients, ma'am. You can find regular banking services on the ground level." The words echoed in Naomi's mind like a tired refrain. This wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Calmly, she replied, "I have a 10:30 appointment to access my safety deposit box." Miles's expression stiffened, but quickly shifted into a forced smile. He turned to his computer, fingers beginning to type, not to verify anything, but to delay. His keystrokes were sluggish, unmotivated, yet entirely intentional. In the reflection on the polished glass behind him, Naomi caught a glimpse of the bank's internal interface. Her name, Naomi Ellington, was framed in gold, marked with the status Platinum Tier. Handle with priority. Miles saw it. He immediately closed the window. At that moment, a white man in a rumpled pair of jeans and a Harvard t-shirt walked into the lobby. Naomi stood still and watched. Miles's demeanor transformed at once. Genuine smile, respectful nod, welcoming tone. No verification, no hesitation. Service opened up as though the man were the rightful owner of the building. Naomi exhaled, not in anger, but in recognition. This wasn't the first time she had been underestimated, but today was the first time she chose to document it. She took out her phone, calmly, discreetly, and tapped the voice recording icon. When Miles turned back with that same pale smile and said, "I'm afraid I don't see your appointment listed. Are you sure this is the correct branch?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She simply turned her body slightly, just enough for the front, facing camera to capture his face clearly. Then, in a voice that was both gentle and firm, she said, "I've been a client of this branch for 15 years, and I have never mistaken where I belong." It wasn't a statement. It was a signal. Something was about to happen, and no one in that lobby could have imagined that, in just a few minutes, they would no longer have a bank to work at, no stocks to hold, and no power left to judge. Naomi didn't need to raise her voice. All she needed was silence, to prepare for the earthquake no one saw coming. And it would begin the moment Carolyn Drake stepped out of her office in those sharp, high heels. The sharp, cold sound of Carolyn Drake's heels echoed like a declaration of war. Each step was measured, deliberate, embodying an authority forged through nearly 2 decades in a world where only those who mastered the art of sidelining others could climb to the top. She emerged from the corner office in a perfectly tailored cream suit, her hair tightly pinned, her face meticulously made up as if it were a mask designed to shield a world where power was measured by condescending looks and diminishing tones. Carolyn did not ask Naomi for her name, even though Miles had just mentioned it. She addressed her with a single, distancing word. "Ma'am." Polite, yet vague, detached, as though Naomi were a lost guest. Naomi responded clearly, "I'm here for a confirmed appointment to access my safety deposit box." Carolyn tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing with calculated precision. She spoke of private client security, emphasizing the word private like a keyword, as if explaining a premium concept to an outsider. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted. Behind the counter, Tessa Bloom began shuffling papers in feigned busyness, but her eyes kept darting toward Naomi. A security guard near the elevator subtly adjusted his stance, hand resting gently on his radio. A silent cue of precaution. Carolyn requested a thorough verification, a phrase Naomi knew all too well. Thorough did not apply to clients in tailored suits, not to men with silver hair and Mont Blanc pens. Thorough was a mask for bias. Miles asked Naomi for multiple forms of identification: driver's license, passport, and even a third form of verification. Naomi calmly opened her worn canvas bag and slowly took out her wallet. As she reached inside, Miles unconsciously stepped back, a reflex rooted in a deeply embedded suspicion. Naomi noticed. She had seen it before, in airports, in office elevators, in international boardrooms. Carolyn took the documents with a scrutiny that resembled a customs officer inspecting a forged passport. Everything was valid, yet her gaze did not soften. "Account number, please," Carolyn said, her voice as cold as ice. Naomi recited a 16-digit number from memory, a number representing nearly $500 million in assets and 3 internal system notes. "Handle with utmost care. VIP status. Flagged for executive-only service." Carolyn looked at the screen, and in that moment, she knew. But what she saw did not match the person standing before her. So she lied. She claimed the system was experiencing technical issues, that the information could not be verified at this time. Naomi remained silent. She was not surprised. Lies often came wrapped in sweetness, and that sweetness would be the first to collapse when the truth lit the room. In that instant, Naomi knew everything necessary had just happened, and only one step remained, for the truth to shatter right before their eyes. Naomi Ellington stood tall in the marble-clad lobby, the chandelier's light reflecting off her bare, expressionless face. Yet inside, every cell was recording. She had seen Carolyn Drake glance at the account balance, had seen the label UHNWOI, ultra-high net worth individual, bold on the screen, along with a red directive: priority service, no delay under any circumstance. But instead of following protocol, as they would with any other client, Carolyn coldly pressed the ESC key, then let out a theatrically measured sigh. "Perhaps you should come back when you are more appropriately dressed for a private banking environment," she said, with a faint smile and a tone so polite it stung. The words landed like a blade slicing through every pretense. There were no system errors anymore, no security protocols, only raw prejudice, wrapped in what they called appearance standards. Naomi didn't react. She didn't have to. She tilted her head slightly, glanced down at her own clothes, jeans, a polo shirt, old sneakers, then looked at the 3 other clients also wearing jeans. 2 white men, 1 blonde woman. None of them had been asked about appropriate attire. She asked, "Could you clarify exactly which part of my outfit makes you feel it's inappropriate?" Carolyn blinked but didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. Because what she truly meant, that Naomi's skin color did not belong on these polished floors, was something she knew better than to say out loud. So instead, she leaned on a vague phrase: "This is a professional environment." Naomi let out a soft laugh, not out of amusement, but because that exact lie had echoed for years in many places, from many people with smiles just like Carolyn's. "Downstairs might be more comfortable for your transaction needs," Carolyn continued, trying to wrap up the discomfort. But the phrase, "your transaction needs," rang like an indictment. Naomi slowly pulled out her phone and activated the camera without a word. She simply asked, I need to clarify this. Are you saying my transaction needs are different from other clients? Based on what, exactly? Carolyn hesitated. Then her voice dropped, sharper now. Don't be overly sensitive. This isn't about race. It's simply an impression that doesn't align. A heavy silence fell. Naomi nodded slowly. Your impression is about to cost you $500 million. The words were light as a breeze, but landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Carolyn didn't understand. Miles didn't understand. No one in that lobby understood. But Naomi did. Because she knew that in just 10 more minutes, every face looking down on her now would become a face begging to stay. And she would show them what power really looked like, when it belonged to someone they never thought should have been here in the first place. Naomi Ellington did not move from her spot, nor did she raise her voice. She simply stood there, phone still recording, eyes calmly observing every slight shift in the expressions of Carolyn, Miles, and even Tessa Bloom, who were all beginning to sense the creeping feeling of losing control. Not because Naomi was causing a scene, but because her composure was too unusual. That silence was the warning before the storm. Carolyn's tone changed. She suddenly became more assertive, signaling to Miles with a sharp gesture. Call security. Escort this guest out of the private banking area. Miles, as if relieved from his confusion, quickly picked up the internal phone. Other staff in the lobby subtly formed a semicircle around Naomi. No one said anything, but their eyes resembled those of spectators at a hunt, silently watching. Carolyn, in a movement that was anything but unconscious, crossed her arms in front of her chest, reinforcing her perceived authority. You can leave calmly, or we will have to handle this according to security protocol, she said, attempting a neutral tone that now carried a slight tremble. Naomi slowly turned in a circle, meeting each gaze. Some avoided her eyes. Others, like Tessa, simply looked down, pretending to study meaningless spreadsheets on their screens. Naomi wasn't angry, not even hurt. She was simply tired. Tired of the same refusals wrapped in polished corporate language. She raised the phone closer to her face, letting the microphone catch every word, and said, I want to confirm that you are denying me service not due to security concerns, not because of a system error, but based on judgment tied to my appearance and your assumptions. Carolyn broke her poised facade. She let out a dry laugh and snarled, Don't make this about race. You don't belong here. I know it. You know it. Everyone here knows it. Those words, meant to assert final dominance, instead lit the fuse for what was coming. Naomi stopped the recording. She said nothing more. She walked toward the exit with a cold smile, offering only one sentence. You're right about one thing. In 10 minutes, I won't belong here anymore. Neither will this bank. She walked out. But what remained was an unnamed unease, a strange twist in Carolyn's gut when she remembered Naomi's eyes just before turning away. Not angry, not defeated, but the gaze of someone who already knew how the story would end. And as the elevator doors closed, the countdown began. To a collapse none of them ever saw coming. The elevator slid down silently, floor by floor, as Naomi stood still, her fingers gently tightening around the strap of her worn canvas bag. Her reflection on the stainless steel door no longer resembled the woman who had been diminished just minutes earlier. What looked back was an architect preparing the collapse of a rotten structure. She was not in a rush. She counted each floor as though every number marked the end of another mistake they had made. When the doors opened on the ground floor, Naomi didn't look around. She didn't walk toward the reception desk, where the security guard still watched her with a wary gaze. She took out a phone, not the one containing the damning video, but the other one, a device few knew she carried, one that only 12 people in the world had the number to. She called. No introduction, no small talk. On the other end was Gregory Lynn, the CFO of Ellington Holdings, her trusted partner for more than a decade, and unbeknownst to Miles Everett, his distant cousin. Naomi's voice was firm. "Initiate Omega Protocol. 10 minutes. Everything." Gregory didn't ask questions. He didn't need confirmation. He had been trained to know that when Naomi said everything, it meant nearly $500 million, loans, bonds, credit lines, active investments. All of it had to be pulled from Premier National within exactly 10 minutes, not 11. Not an hour later. 10 minutes as the perfect response to an insult that hadn't even lasted 10 seconds. Immediately after, Naomi made 2 more calls. One to the chairman of the largest pension fund Ellington Holdings managed, a man she had once quietly helped through personal financial troubles. And another to the CEO of Techverse Group, a tech firm currently holding over $150 million in assets at Premier National, placed there on Naomi's recommendation. When the third call ended, Naomi finally walked toward the parking lot. Not to a Bentley or a Mercedes, waiting in the private garage beneath her penthouse, but to an old Toyota she liked to drive on weekends. People often assumed wealth had to be loud, but real power moved quietly. As Naomi turned the key in the ignition, a gentle breeze passed through. She lowered the window and looked up at the tall building she had just exited, the one that believed it could dismiss her the same way it had dismissed so many others. They had no idea. They couldn't imagine. But in just a few minutes, a chain of events would trigger all at once, and no internal alert system would be fast enough to warn them. Because their ears were too used to the sound of performative applause to recognize the silence of a storm. And that storm, Naomi was its creator. On the top floor of Premier National, Carolyn Drake sank back into her office chair with a rare sense of satisfaction. She sipped her overpriced latte, her fingers gliding across the polished glass desk, as if the matter were settled. Naomi Ellington, a name no longer worth mentioning, in Carolyn's eyes was just another troublemaker, someone who would soon vanish like the thousands of other disgruntled clients. She laughed with Miles about the kind of people who don't understand boundaries, while Tessa discreetly pulled out her phone to dig through Naomi's Instagram account, hoping to find something mock-worthy. But the account was bare. Just a few photos of a vegetable garden, a community center, and a handful of inspirational quotes, nothing to ridicule. And yet they still laughed. That smug, unbothered laughter lasted exactly 3 minutes. Miles's computer screen suddenly flashed red. An alert neither of them had ever seen before appeared. Mass withdrawal alert, level alpha. He frowned, refreshing the system. But the warning returned, now accompanied by numbers. $85 million had just been withdrawn from institutional accounts. A second later, the figure jumped to 130. 2 million. Carolyn walked over. The moment she saw the dashboard, Her face turned pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. Then her phone started ringing violently. 7 missed calls from the CEO's office. She didn't dare answer. But on the 8th ring, the sound felt like a stone from the edge of a cliff. She had no choice but to pick up. "What the hell did you do?" Jameson Wexley, the CEO, roared so loudly into the phone that she had to pull it away from her ear. "Naomi Ellington, you just kicked the CEO of Ellington Holdings out of our flagship branch. Do you have any idea how much of our assets she controls? 42%. She's calling every bank, every fund, every partner. You just triggered a financial tsunami." Carolyn stood frozen, legs trembling, unable to form a single word. Miles stared at the system and whispered, "We're down another 60 million, and it's still bleeding." Jennifer dropped her phone. On the screen was a Forbes headline. "The silent woman who shook the U.S. financial industry, Naomi Ellington." She didn't have time to finish reading before waves of alerts from Bloomberg, Reuters, and CNBC flooded in. Premier National faces largest private banking withdrawal crisis in history. Carolyn was still holding her phone, but the CEO had hung up. Her screen shifted to an emergency email from the legal department. "Alert. Internal discrimination allegation. Video leaked." Attached was a 2-minute, 36-second video recording the entire exchange between Naomi and Carolyn that morning. The voices, the expressions, and the damning sentence. "You don't belong here." Below the video was a single line of text. "Naomi gave you 10 minutes. That was 9 more than necessary." The entire office fell into collapse, not because of the numbers, but because of a far more terrifying truth. They had misjudged the wrong person, and the price for that mistake was now being calculated by the second. As the video began to spread like wildfire across social media, the seemingly untouchable systems at Premier National started to crumble. With each passing second, another partner announced their withdrawal. Alerts from the bank's servers flooded in so rapidly that the tech team could no longer keep up. Then a message appeared on the central screen, unlike anything they had seen before. "National liquidity alert. Reserve below federal safety threshold." A bank over 150 years old, holding more than $200 billion in assets, now stood on the brink of collapse in less than 10 minutes. No bombs exploded. No hackers infiltrated. There was only one woman, and a truth that had long been denied. At the headquarters of Ellington Holdings, 6 blocks away, Naomi Ellington stood in the emergency operations room, where 12 massive screens displayed real-time withdrawal data, market fluctuations, and non-stop news headlines. Beside her, Gregory Lynn reported while his eyes stayed fixed on his tablet. "Techverse just pulled the full 118 million. Phoenix Fund confirmed freezing all investments. 2 insurance firms are preparing to withdraw, and we've completed transferring all assets to Meridian Bank." Naomi nodded, her eyes reflecting the world crumbling around them, not out of revenge, but because of the truth. A truth that had been buried for years was now rising from within the very system that once worshipped it. Outside the windows, news vans lined the entrance of Premier National. Reporters began live streaming what would become an unprecedented event in American financial history. Inside, Carolyn tried calling Naomi again, but the line had already been blocked. She ordered the bank to be locked down, hoping to contain the panic. But Carolyn didn't understand. This wasn't a bank robbery. It was a liberation. Another call came through. this time from Jameson Wexley, the CEO of Premier National. He wasn't shouting anymore. His voice was subdued, anxious, pleading. "What does she want? We can make this right. We'll do anything." But it was already too late. As Carolyn stepped into the elevator to go downstairs and try to apologize to Naomi, she discovered her access card no longer worked. The screen displayed a simple message: "Access revoked." Naomi didn't need to destroy the bank with force. She only needed to force them to confront the truth they had spent years trying to hide, that the so-called standards they enforced, from beginning to end, were nothing more than a mask for exclusion. And now, that very exclusion was coming back to shut the door they once so confidently closed on others. The question was no longer how did this happen, but rather how did they ever think it wouldn't? 3 months after the historic collapse of Premier National, the Senate Banking Committee hearing became a national event. The media dubbed it the Watergate of Finance, and at the center of that hearing stood none other than Naomi Ellington, dressed in a simple black suit, her face calm as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. When asked whether she had broken the American banking system, Naomi simply offered a faint smile and replied, "No, I just opened the door wide enough for the nation to see that system was already rotting from the inside." With a voice steady yet resolute, she exposed the exclusionary mechanisms cloaked in professional jargon like risk control, brand positioning, and client segmentation. She pointed out that each rejected file was not just a statistic. It was a dream crushed, a family locked out of opportunity, a generation forced to start from decades behind the starting line. Carolyn Drake, the woman who had once cast Naomi out of the bank lobby, was also present at the hearing, this time as a convicted witness. After pleading guilty to embezzlement and testifying about the internal client filtering process based on race, she was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 2,000 hours of community financial education service. Upon her release, she volunteered at a non-profit center, teaching women who had once been denied loans, just as she had once denied them. Naomi had no interest in revenge. She once said, "Destroying someone is easy. Transforming someone, that is the hard part." And she chose the harder path. She personally arranged for Carolyn's daughter, Emily, to continue receiving specialized therapy, an act few knew about, but none who did would ever forget. Following the hearing, Congress passed the Ellington Act, a landmark financial reform mandating full transparency in loan approvals, enforcing heavy penalties for discriminatory practices, and requiring banks to report service equity across all communities. The banking industry changed at its core. Branches that had long closed in low-income neighborhoods reopened. Loans once denied were now approved based on genuine potential. And at the center of it all was Naomi, the woman who brought an empire to its knees with grace. 5 years later, the building once named Premier National had been renamed the Ellington Financial Center. A plaque hung in the main lobby, inscribed with the words, "Everyone who walks in here belongs." Naomi still visited weekly, not to review ledgers, but to sit with young entrepreneurs, to listen to their dreams, and to tell them stories of an old watch, an heirloom from her late husband, a man who believed that justice did not need to be loud, only unwavering. One day, Naomi received a message from an unknown number with a photo of a young black girl, about 12 years old, standing in front of a small bank in Mississippi, holding her very first savings passbook. Beneath the image was a single line. "The bank lady told me I belong here. Thank you for making that true." Naomi smiled, her eyes drifting to the skyline through the tall windows of the top floor where the sunset bathed the city, a city she once had to prove she deserved to exist in. Now, there was no more proving to do. Not for herself. Not for anyone. Because the doors had been opened. And once the doors are opened, the world is never the same. 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, were enough to bring down a bank. But a lifetime lived with principle and belief can build an entirely new future. And Naomi Ellington was the proof of that. In the world of finance, the most valuable currency is not money, but trust. And when that trust is betrayed, the consequence is not just the loss of assets, but the collapse of an entire system that has stood for generations. Naomi Ellington's story proves that justice does not require loud outrage, only one person brave enough to say no at the right moment. If you believe that real change begins with small but righteous actions, don't forget to like and subscribe to join us as we continue to share inspiring stories like this one. And leave a comment with the phrase, "Belong here," if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what they look like.